You're listening to Terror in Wichita, where we walk you through the story of the brutal murders in Wichita. Narrated by Max Bowen, written by Paul Caranci, and edited and produced by Skylar Batz.
Chapter 3. The Carr's Reign of Terror begins. It would not appear that murder was a motive, nor would it seem that race or hate played a part in their actions, despite the fact that all of their victims were white. Rather, greed, precariously coupled with a deliberate disregard for human life, a quality that had been inculcated over the course of many years, figured to be the Carr brothers' impetus. Motive aside, however, the brothers were about to begin a crime spree that would draw national attention, become the source of protests and discord within communities, and generate charges and countercharges of racism and cover-up. Their plan was as ill-conceived as it was executed. The original plan was to follow people in expensive vehicles, carjack them, force them to empty their bank accounts using local ATMs, and then release the victims unharmed. Things did not go as planned. Thursday, December 7th, 2000, 10:50 p.m. For 23-year-old Andrew Schreiber, life was wonderful. As a sports enthusiast, he was lucky enough to work as an assistant baseball coach at Newman University in Wichita, Kansas. He had loved baseball ever since he could walk, and preferred to catch so he could be involved in every play and every pitch of nearly every game. When not playing baseball, the 6-foot-tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Schreiber could frequently be found on the golf course. At about 10:45, on the evening of December 7th, Andrew arrived at the come-and-go convenience store at 21st and Woodlawn. He made a small purchase and walked back to his SUV, a 1998 Ford Expedition, which was parked in a lot on the side of the building. He took his seat behind the wheel, but before he could turn the key in the ignition, he was approached by Reginald Carr. In his hand, Reginald held a small, black, semi-automatic handgun, palm down. Carr held the gun barrel to the window of the driver's door and ordered Schreiber to move over to the front passenger seat. As Schreiber complied, Reginald climbed into the driver's seat and struck Schreiber on the back of the head with his gun. "Hurry up," Carr ordered. Reginald then backed the SUV out of the parking lot and drove away. "Do you have any money?" Reginald demanded. Schreiber handed him his wallet, which contained some cash, his credit cards, and other personal effects. The carjacker pulled into a nearby alley, where Reginald's brother Jonathan jumped into the passenger seat, pushing Schreiber into the middle position of the rear seat. He was barely in position when Jonathan leaned over and struck him on the head with his gun, barking, "Don't look at me!" One of the brothers asked if Schreiber had an ATM card, adding, "Someone who drives a car like this, the Expedition, must have money." Schreiber responded in the affirmative, and Reginald returned his wallet, instructing Schreiber to retrieve the card from it. He did so, and handed the wallet back to his attacker. Driving to a bank, Reginald pulled up to the ATM, allowing Schreiber to access it through the rear passenger window. With Jonathan's gun to his head, Schreiber withdrew the $300 maximum, and the gunman ordered him to hand the cash and receipt over his shoulder without looking at him. Jonathan grabbed both, and scanning the receipt, noticed that Schreiber still had money in his account. "We are not done yet," he said. Reginald drove to a second ATM, while Jonathan continued to point the gun at Schreiber's head. Again, the victim withdrew the maximum of $300 and handed over the cash and the receipt. After determining that money still remained in the account, the carjackers repeated they were not yet done. At a third ATM, Schreiber's request for $300 was denied, but he was able to withdraw $200, which he handed to Jonathan along with the receipt, as he had done before. Looking to the receipt, Jonathan said with a laugh, "We're going to leave you with $8 and some change," while still pointing his gun at Schreiber's head. Reginald drove from the bank, traveling north of the convenience store, and then west on Highway 96. While en route, the carjackers ordered Schreiber to remove all his jewelry and give it to them. Obediently, he began to remove his silver Guess watch with a blue face, turning his head as he did. He felt the punishing blow of the gun slam against his head a third time, as Jonathan yelled, "I told you not to look at us!" The conversation between the gunmen now turned to the possibility of dropping Schreiber off on a dirt road. Several roads they passed were determined unsuitable because they were not remote enough for their purposes. Schreiber wondered what that purpose was, as he sat silently in the rear seat of the SUV. The brothers also spoke about the expedition, and Jonathan noted how much he liked it, saying he wanted one. Then, perhaps more as a way of controlling and alarming his victim, Jonathan said that he was going to take Schreiber's pants and shoes when they dropped him off, because it was so cold outside. The thought of it made Jonathan laugh with amusement at his own remark. After driving aimlessly, Reginald eventually ended up back in town, stopping at a car wash near the Windsor at Woodgate Apartments on East 21st Street. There, Jonathan and Schreiber changed positions a few times, with Jonathan finally instructing Schreiber to lie face down on the floor in front of the rear seat. Reginald thought it wise for Jonathan to get his own car, so shortly after leaving the car wash, Reginald drove to the original meeting spot, and Jonathan exited the vehicle, reminding Reginald to be sure to wipe down the expedition. Jonathan got into his own vehicle, and both men drove away, with Jonathan in the lead. After another 10 or 15 minutes, the vehicles departed the paved road and came to a stop on a dirt road. Reginald turned the engine off, removed the keys from the ignition, and wiped the expedition clean. He exited the vehicle and spoke to Jonathan about whether or not they should leave Schreiber with the keys. Eventually, Reginald said to Schreiber, who was still face down on the back floor of the expedition, that they would leave the keys in the street. "Do you have a spare tire?" he asked Schreiber. Upon learning that he did, Reginald shot 3 times into one of the rear tires of the expedition, instructing Schreiber to wait 20 minutes before leaving the scene. Schreiber heard the 2 men get into the other car and drive away. He peeked out the window and saw the receding square taillights of the other car. He then exited the vehicle, found his keys in the street, and managed to drive all the way home with a flat tire. That's when he called 911. Schreiber survived the ordeal, but was badly shaken by the experience and hurting from the repeated blows to the head. Though he would never be the same, he was grateful to still be alive. Monday, December 11th, 2000, approximately 9:20 p.m. 4 days after their successful carjacking, kidnapping, and robbery of Schreiber, and apparently emboldened by their success, the brothers approached a 55-year-old red-headed musician by the name of Linda Ann Walenta, known to her friends as Ann. The brothers had the expectation of carjacking her as well, but their plans would not be executed as smoothly this time. With youthful looks that betrayed her age, the fair-skinned woman was a cellist and librarian with the Wichita Symphony Orchestra. Along with her husband Donald, Anne had 2 grown children. She also had a beguiling love for classical music and enjoyed sharing its joy with others. That is what led her to work for a group that taught classical music to young black people. At approximately 9:20 p.m. on a Monday evening, Anne waved goodbye to her orchestra mates, climbed into her 2000 GMC Yukon SUV, and began her drive home from rehearsal. As she approached the streets of her upscale East Wichita neighborhood, she noticed a light-colored 4-door vehicle resembling a Honda turn behind her. The car continued to follow her as she turned onto her street, a dead end with a cul-de-sac. As Walenta approached her house, she noticed that the car had stopped in front of the residence directly south of hers, and when Walenta pulled into the driveway of her single-story home, she saw a black male emerge from the front passenger side of the light-colored car and began walking toward the driver's side of her Yukon. Now on a heightened sense of alert, Walenta left her vehicle running and decided to sit for just a moment in her SUV before exiting. For her, it was the wrong moment. The air was cold and dry when Jonathan Carr approached her vehicle asking for help. She cautiously lowered the driver's side window only a few inches so as to hear what he was saying. Before she could respond to his plea, however, Jonathan pulled a handgun, stuck it inside the window palm down, and pointed it at her head. In a panic, Walenta tried to start the vehicle, forgetting that she had left the engine running. "Don't move the car," Jonathan ordered, but Walenta instinctively put the car in reverse and started to back out of her driveway. That's when Jonathan began to fire. He pulled the trigger several times, shattering the window with one of 3 shots. The bullets entered the vehicle, coming to rest in Walenta's body, one of them severing her spinal cord. Jonathan began to run, and Walenta, still conscious, watched her assailant as he fled. While Jonathan was running toward his waiting car, Reginald started to drive it away. Walenta was paralyzed from the waist down, and wasn't even sure if her shooter had made it to the waiting car prior to its leaving. But still, she wasn't taking any chances that he might have remained in the area. She fell forward on the wheel, the weight of her body pressing hard on the horn of the SUV. Anna Kelly, Walenta's neighbor from across the street, heard the gunshots and the blare of the horn and looked outside. She realized that the honking was coming from Walenta's Yukon, and that the Yukon's lights were flashing. She opened her screen door and was about to step out, when Walenta began calling to her for help. Kelly told her husband to call the police, as she ran to her neighbor's car where she found Walenta covered with blood and slumped forward in the driver's seat. With blood oozing from several places on her body, the woman told Kelly that she had been shot by a black man with wiry hair. When police and emergency responders arrived, they transported her to the hospital. Once there, Walenta was able to provide police with more details and a better description of her assailant, saying that he was between 5 feet 9 inches and 6 feet, and described his hair as long, straight, and wiry, adding that it was about shoulder length with corkscrews. Though critical when she arrived at the hospital, Walenta's condition began to improve. She remained in the hospital for several weeks, and on January 2, 2001, was being transferred to a rehabilitation facility. On that day, however, she suffered a pulmonary embolus, a complication of her paralysis, and died. Though surviving for 3 weeks, Linda Ann Walenta will be considered the first murder victim of the Carr brothers' greed and selfishness, manifested just 3 weeks before Christmas. She would not be their last.